And so now if we could, can we put my screen on Spotlight so I can go ahead and introduce our last speakers for our final panel of the first day of South Summit. We're gonna have Nic Brierre Aziz and Zac Manuel in conversation with one another on the city's history, key moments in the city's history that have informed their artistry and the intersection of historical and popular culture, iconography as a tool for their social commentary. So I just want to give a brief introduction to these two incredible artists before we bring them up. You'll notice that we've got Zac involved quite a bit this year. Zac Manuel, he's our feature presenting artist. He's an award-winning New Orleans bred and based filmmaker, the son of a touring jazz musician and a community builder at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. His work in documentary and music video explores intimacy, Black masculinity, class, identity, and legacy, which happens to be our theme. And Nic Brierre Aziz is a Haitian New Orleanian interdisciplinary artist and curator. His work is particularly centered around the Caribbean diaspora and Blackness as an experience, construct, and capitalist tool. In addition to his personal artistic practice, he currently serves as the community engagement curator for the New Orleans Museum of Art. He's a recipient of several artist residencies and fellowships, and most recently was selected as a 2020 Andy Warhol Foundation Curatorial Fellow and a 2021 Joan Mitchell Center Artist in Residence. So as you can imagine, these two who are close friends and have known each other since they were very young and contributed such incredible art to the city and the world are gonna have a lot to say. It'll be a great conversation. I'd like to go ahead and invite them to the virtual stage now to get started.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hello, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And Nic, it's great to see you. Great to see the space that you're in too.
Yeah. I'm in the studio, the Arts Council space. Yeah, I think I told you about that. It's the residency program that they sponsor. So it's me and 6 other artists in this. Each of us have our own studio. So this is my spot.
Excellent. I have a couple questions for you, but I want to just start out by, could we bring up the slideshow that we prepared for this conversation? Thank you. So Nic, I feel like when we first kind of engaged each other in this conversation, you know, kind of what the framework from it became was like, what is Southern legacy? And I feel like that's something that can mean a lot of different things to different people. And when I was thinking about this conversation, I just did some really basic things like look up the definition of Southern and look up the definition of legacy. And the definition of legacy actually, well, first of all, the definition of Southern, which I thought was actually really interesting, was that it was like, of or relating to a region in the South. But the example of a sentence they gave was like people from, poor people in the South or something like that. It was something that was connotated towards poverty. And the definition of legacy was, something that you pass down, like wealth that you pass down within your family. And I thought about how those two things kind of conflicted with one another, especially when you talk about Black Southern legacy. And I really thought about not really what it means to pass down some sort of monetary fortune or object or anything tangible between, between family or between hands or between generations. But I really started thinking about legacy as the kind of notable and tangible effect that history has on the present. And these things that exist around us, and even the way that we hold ourselves in public space, and by we, I mean Black people, Black Americans, and the way that we move around public space as a part of our legacy. And I guess I think about that now because I think about, before I get to kind of these words that we put down, I think about the space that you're in right now. And I guess just jumping into a question for you, what does it mean? One, what does legacy mean to you? And then kind of jumping off from that, what does it feel like to be in a room with these symbols and these objects I think that have been so traumatic in our legacy as Black Americans, and to sit within that space.
Yeah, so I think for me, when I think about legacy, the first thing that comes to mind is my family, my grandparents, my great grandparents, my great great grandparents. I think that's also why I've become intentional about having my identification be Haitian New Orleanian, because I think I want to make sure to always hold and acknowledge those parts of my legacy. You know, my grandfather on my mom's side, born in Haiti, and he just had such a rich personal journey that has influenced me so deeply. And that's just really how I got started in art. And then, you know, on the other side of that, you know, my dad's father was a hustler. You know, like we talked about hustling a lot. You know, he started a pie business in New Orleans just by walking around the St. Bernard Housing Project, and from just walking around delivering pies that his wife made, you know, they expanded to having 3 locations in the city at one time. And so I think when I think about legacy, I think about that. But in regards to these symbols, I think, you know, everything that we see around us holds weight, it holds power, it holds meaning. And I think a lot of these symbols that I'm currently interrogating through my work are symbols that I feel like that we all, you know, growing up in a city like this, subconsciously ingested and not really being told the weight of them, the truth behind them, the impact that it was having on our conscious and subconscious, you know, existence. And so I think now it's like, okay, as an adult and having art as my main practice, you know, it's like, okay, like how am I using these symbols and how am I interrogating these symbols as really active, like, you know, you have on the slide, reconciliation. I think it's all, art is to me, the best form of therapy. And so I think being able to use the work as a personal but collective therapeutic practice is some of what I attempt to do with it, you know.
Mm. Yeah, it makes me think about, I was listening to Darcy McKinnon, who's an incredible producer, filmmaker, mentor here in New Orleans. In her keynote speech this morning, she stated a quote by historian Christy Coleman that says, I hope I quoted this right, "More people are familiar with popular culture than historical facts."
Mm.
And I think about that a lot. And it's actually, I had been thinking about this, and when Darcy said that, it really kind of clicked for me, because I was thinking about in my own work, like, how do we understand our personal legacy as Black Southerners? And then what's my intention for making the work that I want to make? And I think that a lot of times what I'm thinking about is kind of the balance of imagery that we kind of remember in our collective conscious of, or collective unconscious of, being Black Americans, and thinking about, like, what are the images of Black families in the Deep South that were represented in media, in sitcoms, or in movies, or in painting, or in photography, you know, and how many of those images represent what my family looked like, or kind of the, you know, both the kind of deep sincerity that people, and love that people have for one another, but also rifts in families that make families, you know, dynamic and nuanced and complex. And then how many of those visualizations were separate from, you know, just actually being in slavery, you know. And I feel like there's a lot of representations of the Deep South when you're talking about Black Americans that are actually just films or depictions of slavery. And so I think that what I'm often trying to do with my work is kind of shift the balance of what kind of this collective memory becomes by documenting or scripting or showing what Black life looks like in a more complex, more nuanced, more contemporary way. And thinking about that, I feel like there's something that we've both been thinking about, and a lot of people have been thinking about in the past couple years, maybe 5 years or so. It's just like, what does, and I was thinking about that quote, and then I was like, so what defines fact? You know what I mean? And we look around us and we look at like these statues of like quote unquote heroes, like behind you sitting on these pedestals, kind of looking down on everybody else in positions of power. And so I want to go to the first slide, or not the first, yes, this one. So in 2017, I believe, yeah, I was given the opportunity to direct a music video by Mavis Staples. Usually I talk about my documentary work, but I'm going to go to the last music video that I ever directed. But I think the reason why I wanted to like explore this work again, especially in the space of your work, is I feel like we're both exploring the idea of what the truth of kind of Southern legacy is and how it exists today. And what I was thinking about was, how are the symbols that are reflected within our public spaces and within our consciousness every day, how can we shift the idea of what those symbols are? And so in this music video, for the song If All I Was Black, we basically took the idea of the Confederate monuments and we kind of shifted the identity of them and shifted what they actually mean. And if we go to the next slide, kind of like the climax of the video was actually, we created on the pedestal of the Jefferson Davis monument, we made our own statue that was honoring, you know, Black women, Black people, just really folks who have, you know, allowed for the prosperity of this country through their physical labor, through their bodies, through their emotional labor. So we created this statue. I think it was about maybe 12 feet tall. And that kind of became the centerpiece for the video and how we were kind of reimagining what our contemporary, you know, legacy could look like had it not been, you know, shifted, I think, to the ideals of the dominant power. In the next slide, you can see a couple like behind the scenes, like process pictures of the making of this statue, which was designed based on a friend of mine, Kia Moffitt, who's a New Orleans native, and carved by an artist named Gabe Wimmer from a solid piece of styrofoam. But I really love the process of making that video and just the way that we could think about what our immediate surroundings look like in a way that honored what I feel is a more honest depiction of history. And then if we go to the next slide, I feel like this is just like, yes, we weren't even in communication at the time that we were making this, but like, right. We were both thinking crazy similar things. I know. So yeah. What, like, where, tell me about New Wars, New Stories, New Heroes. Where did this come from? How did this come about?
Yeah, this was a collaborative piece. There's artist T-Rock Moore, Alex Marks as well. And this just came from really an evolution of work that me and T-Rock were already doing. She's a friend, has helped me a lot over the last several years. And it's been just a very reciprocal relationship in terms of the help and guidance we've given each other. And I think, you know, this was the year after we started working together. And we just talked about wanting to capture this moment, this history before the plinth came down. And so I think we might have captured this like maybe like 2 or 3 months before they started, destructing the plinth. And I think it, you know, the idea like just evolved, and we talked about like what we wanted to capture, how we were going to capture it, my safety, you know, being up there, you know, it was a lot. There's a lot that had to be, I think, discussed in like kind of like the pre-production of it. But then I really was sitting with just the idea of like that particular plinth, like that space, and like how like that monument went up in 1915, you know, and that's 4 years after NOMA was founded. I try to like always kind of come back to those points in the history because, we're thinking about legacy and fact, like those are facts. Like it's like NOMA, this museum that continues to exist is a very exclusionary space that I, fortunately, unfortunately, have to engage with a lot. 4 years after that space of exclusion is created on a former plantation, you put a monument, dedicated to the Confederacy, which obviously has, so many, I think, layers of oppression, racism, and exclusion within that. And so it took 100 years, for the city to be like, you know what, like, no, we're going to take these down. We're going to make a different decision. And then it took another 2 years for it to actually come down. And so, the plan, like the thought was just, okay, let's remix, let's recontextualize this space. And like the title says, new wars, new stories, new heroes. Just similar to your work, creating a different monument, a different narrative, a different conversation with these spaces. And I think it's so crazy that we were both doing this at the same time and just didn't even, couple blocks away, didn't even know we were doing the same thing. So it's I think this piece, and I think New Orleans just sits at such a integral part of the monument conversation because this was happening in 2016, 2017, and then we see what happened and what's continuing to happen across the world with not just Confederate monuments now. It's like you see monuments being pulled down by people in London and all over the world, just like the people really speaking and saying, yo, nah, we want different stories, we want different narratives. So I think, this piece was just a way to spread that different narrative.
I think that like in kind of the first slide, we talk about what is Southern legacy, and we had kind of talked about breaking it down into like these pillars or these tenets almost. And, there was time and memory, which to me, those two things really kind of connect to each other. And that's over labor and joy. But symbols and idols, I feel like, is somewhat synonymous or it has a strong connection to power. And I think the things that we symbolize within our culture also become the things that we believe to be powerful. And so if we can, by the work that we're doing, shift what those symbols look like, maybe we can shift the connotation of those ideas and change the balance of what power means, or change the idea of what power means within our society, or within our culture, or within our, within the era that we're living in.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think this, in terms of even like, to that point of like shifting the power of the symbol, it's like, I think this print to me was even additionally significant because P.G.T. Beauregard was the general who led the creation of the flag. And so it's just like literally, using that space, that monument, that plinth, and remixing that symbol that represents so much of what I'm against personally, and I think a lot of us are against. And so
I'm gonna drop the video in the chat because there's a couple images that I didn't show, but we did a little bit of work around that monument also, and a friend of mine, Terry Jackson, who I've worked with, who kind of represents like the New Orleans chapter of the Buffalo Soldiers. We placed a horse him on horseback in front of that monument, and I really like that image and that kind of transformation of what this space means and how we look at this space, and now it's down, and now the meaning is completely different, I guess. I mean, what do you feel like when you walk past that space now?
It's I think it's obviously a new beginning, a new chapter in the memory. But I think it's a conversation that I know I come back to with my mom a lot, because and there are different artists like Titus Kafar, I know, has talked about a similar, in that like with the memory, like, you know, like there are now people who will exist in New Orleans, particularly youth who are coming up and like never know that that space existed in that way. And like, is that good or bad? You know, and like, what does that do for the collective memory? And like, what does that do for the reconciliation of, you know, this history? And yeah, that's something I think about now with it. Like, it's like, cause yeah, that literal slate has been wiped clean. And then like, it's like, there's like literally nothing evidence of, you know, it's just completely erased. And, you know, obviously we have work in art that can, you know, that like we've done or other artists have done that can capture that like snapshot of that moment. And, you know, maybe that is now used as kind of like, okay, like, well, why did those artists have to, what is that from? Like, and why those artists had to respond in that way? Like, what was that location? What did, you know, and you as like the new kind of like, you know, pillar of the conversation, the history, you know, I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that brings up an interesting point of like, when we are kind of dismantling, in the process of dismantling, how much of our history are we erasing or causing to be forgotten to future generations? I feel like, you know, in my bio, I note that my mother was an urban planner. And I think the reason why I put that in there is because there are spaces in the city that, for me, hold a lot of weight and that I can kind of continue to return to as a filmmaker. And one of them is the Claiborne Underpass. And the Claiborne Underpass, you know, formerly before the interstate was erected in maybe mid-60s, late 50s, mid-60s, was the Treme, was Mid-City, was, you know, an area of Black businesses, a successful area of Black businesses outside of kind of the wider, more commercial shopping space, which was Canal Street. And now, you know, it is under the Claiborne overpass. And so that space, I don't know, it holds a lot of weight to me. And I think that, like, yes, its original intention of being kind of this space of Black business and kind of Black entrepreneurship, that was kind of intentionally paved over. But the spirit of what that space is, I think it transcends, you know, the physical kind of construction of this interstate and becomes this space for culture and community and, you know, again, entrepreneurialism. And like we talked about, and I think what is a big part of my work is just like hustlerism, like the idea of hustling and kind of the what do you call it? I guess like the creativity of the necessity of having to make a way for yourself outside of traditional forms of economy or capitalism or society. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's such a big part of what our self-identity is to hustle and to be a hustler. My dad's a hustler. My dad's a writer and a musician. You know, I feel like sometimes it's like, I'm a film hustler. Like, I mean, I knew I got my start like just hustling a lot of jobs and telling people that I was good at what I do, even when I was still in the process of learning. Yeah, I don't know. How do you, what does that mean to you when I talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my dad's a hustler too. And like grew up, you know, as an entrepreneur in the family business, like starting, I'm literally wearing the shirt right now. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's you know, he started off as a kid and then like that hustle has just continued, you know. I think, yeah, I get so much of my hustle from him. And I think when you're talking about the time and memory within the legacy piece just now, it's like, it made me think about how like another part, and I guess it's, you know, related to time and memory, but could also be like its own kind of like tenant, but like is this kind of like Southern need and tendency to transcend time and space. And so like we're doing that within our own practices as, you know, as hustlers, as artists, but also like, I think we were talking about it last week in terms of like the Afro speculative nature of that, like it's like Afro speculation being like, you know, as Black people in the South particularly, we've always had to go beyond like the current plane of like understanding to dream about whether it's like going to another place like Great Migration, or dreaming about being from under this enslavement, or dream about like, you know, multi-generations from that moment of who those generations will be and become. You know, it's like I think there's a very there's always been like this like need and heavy weight to the way that we've had to transcend the space and the time. And so like now we're just doing it in our ways with our art. But our ancestors, you know, people who came before us had to do it in other ways, because they didn't have the means that we currently have now, you know. And yeah, it's I feel like it also like, it's like when people come here and they you know, so many people come here to visit and or move here and they're like, I don't know, it's something about the energy of this place. And I think like, you know, it's like, that's, to me, like that's the energy you feeling. Like, it's like, you know, it's these it's these Afro speculative energies. It's these Afro Caribbean roots. You know, it's all these energies just kind of like existing around you, and like this confluence of all that in the air. You know.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I mean, I think that's what I was trying to say about time. Like, I feel like time is like a croissant. You know, it's just like these layers and layers and layers that are just kind of stacked on top of each other. Like, it's definitely not a straight line. Like, we don't move from year to year to year without feeling the impact and the history of the previous one. You know what I mean? So I think when you come here, you are feeling a sense of what the city's identity was and what the people were talking about on the street 100 years ago, you know? And I think that you're experiencing that legacy of, yeah, that legacy of identity, whether it be the city's identity or whether it be people's identity in certain neighborhoods, like you're experiencing that in real time. And I feel like that's, to me, that's what that energy is. Like when I step under the overpass, I'm feeling both the period when that space was devoid of the kind of the interstate structure that looms above it, and I'm feeling the entrepreneurialism and the just like the joy and the and the responsibility to, you know, to wealth and to creating generational wealth within that space. But I'm also feeling the moment that the interstate was erected, and I'm feeling people's pain, and I'm feeling people's, you know, maybe sense of worry and anxiety and listlessness around what the future would look like. And then I'm feeling what's actually happening in that moment. Like I'm feeling, you know, people cook and serve food for other people. I'm feeling like in my film, The Cut, like I'm feeling this guy, you know, offer his space for haircuts, you know, during the pandemic, but also, you know, playing some Frankie Beverly over loudspeakers and like creating this larger space for other people to come and enjoy themselves. And I think whenever I'm filming, especially in New Orleans, like, and having such a deep connection and understanding to this place, like I move through my present, but I feel always the connection of time throughout generations.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's like, I don't know if this is like coming in like the slides, but like that's exactly what I got from Today I Sang by the River last night.
Today I Sang to the River. Yeah, I didn't put that in the slides, but I should have. But
no, that's exactly what I got from that. You know, like I think it was. I told Marta right after. I was like, "Yo, this piece is so powerful to that like lane of like, you know, those moments where it's like it's just the water and you're hearing the water." Yeah. And I think it like creates like this like mirroring effect, this like you say, like croissant of time. You know, it's like you're like just kind of like seeing the water, but then you're also seeing this individual come in and out the frame and just being themselves, you know, amidst all of that time croissantness. You know, it's like,
yeah,
it's so, yeah, no, I loved it. And just to experience it also like at that scale. Yeah, I really love that piece.
Thank you. Yeah, for folks who didn't make it to the screening last night or couldn't, during the pandemic, I mean, I guess we're still in the pandemic, but in the beginning of the pandemic, when we were locked down, I was like feeling this need for connection and for, you know, especially as a documentary filmmaker, just like that kind of like stranger connection where you roll up on somebody or you meet somebody new and you have these kind of dynamic interactions that may last for, you know, 10 minutes or they may last for 10 days, just depending on the project. But anyway, in that kind of lust for connection, I was going out and I was just filming things that were happening in the city. And one thing that I filmed and made a film about was a man who was by himself on the banks of the Mississippi River, really just enjoying space with himself and being alone during a time when like everybody was forced to be alone. But it didn't seem like it seemed like he had really chosen to be alone. And I thought that there was something kind of beautiful about that. And the film is called Today I Sang to the River, which is based on a poem that my father wrote about the time that he would spend kind of offering his grief to the river in the days after Hurricane Katrina. And so, like I said, when I think about time, I kind of think about everything that's happened, all the experiences that's happened in that space at the same time. And yeah, I think the film is viewable through South Summit until May 8th. So if you have a chance, watch it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like, I think there were those moments with the water where it's just like thinking about like my personal relationship to water, thinking how the city engages with water, thinking about Katrina, thinking about African spirituality and the significance of water within that. You know, there was just so much. And then like I said, like just the power and like in and out, you're seeing this person, this Black person, you know, engaging, just being in their element, in themselves, in their body, in their mind, in their spirit, just like having to just go in and out, you know? Yeah, it was so powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's like, there's something that's like really beautiful and profound about that moment. And I think a lot of times when you're rendering things on film, like it has the impact of becoming more profound or increasing the weight of the gravity of a certain moment. But I think at the same time, like I'm often really fascinated by moments of existing in the world that are extremely mundane and just extremely normal and, you know, extremely boring, and looking at the kind of the profundity of being able to exist and actually not do anything and to be satisfied by not doing anything, you know, which I think is like a space that in an idea that hasn't really been offered to us in a safe and supportive way as Black Americans.
Straight up. Yeah, nah, it's because yeah, I think again, going back to that like the history, memory, legacy piece, it's like our beings, our bodies, our minds, our spirits in the Western world context has always been attached to capitalism and productivity, you know, across the continuum of the croissant. I'm keep going back to that because I fucking love it. Sorry. Like, it's like such a good, but it's like, it's true. It's like, you know, whether we're talking about slavery, whether we're talking about pro sports, whether we're talking about art, you know, it's like our expressions have so often been at the root. Our quote unquote productivity has always been at the root of increasing the wealth of lesser melanated people. And so I think like that's like a lot to what I get at with some of my work, whether it's, you know, the jerseys work that I'm doing or the Confederate pinatas, or even some video pieces I've assembled, like video collages. Like, it's like, I think just always kind of rooting that idea of, you know, like I have in my bio, just like Blackness as this construct, experience, and capitalist tool. Because yeah, like there's Tango Thomas, who he has this quote that I love, which he says, the craziest thing about Blackness is that Black people didn't create it. And so like just that idea that like there was this construct that was created, to in some ways box in, and then within that box, then like use these bodies, use these spirits, use these expressions to create wealth, to literally create the wealthiest country, on the planet. It's just like how that's been used. It's just something I always am kind of coming back to.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening to oh man, who's that? Dev Hynes, Blood Orange. There's this sample on his record, on his last, maybe second to last record, where he says, "This year I want to do the most." And I was thinking about how much that didn't age, I think. I don't think that we're in the space of wanting to do the most anymore. I actually think we're in a space of wanting to try to protect ourselves and protect our essence and our energies. And which actually, okay, so that brings me to Jolene, who's been a mentor and a big supporter for a long time. I'm laughing at Sandra Shade's comment. So good. Talking about, and Jolene asks, what advice, insights can you offer to artists around how to sustain hope, energy, inspiration when the hustle can feel overwhelming and exhausting? I think that's a great question that I'm always thinking about. But I also think that, like, when I'm working, and especially when I'm working like in a more like professional capacity, like if I'm, by which I mean it's like I have to offer a product to someone else at the end of the day. I think when I get exhausted is when the work that I'm doing doesn't align with my goals or doesn't align with the goals of my practice. And I think that if like my partner always tells me, like, take a sticky note, write down that spark or that idea and like put it on your computer or put it in front of you somewhere. So it always kind of is front and center in your mind. And I think like as artists, it's easy to get into space, and especially Southern artists. And I think Darcy talked about this also. I think it's easy to get in a space of like making work and then having to either explain or doctor or alter that work in order to fit or become tangible or comprehensible or understandable to people who live in like major art markets. And I'll use that term generally because we're in different mediums, but I feel like it applies. Los Angeles and New York is probably the same two hubs of, I think power, two spheres of power within both of our practices. But I think that when I can hold true to what my original idea was, to what my goal was, and to what my kind of spark or impetus of wanting to make the work in the first place, like I don't actually get exhausted or overwhelmed by it, even if the workload is really intense. So yeah, I don't know if that's an answer to that question, but.
Yeah, I'd say I'd add amazing therapists and amazing tribes, because I feel like you mentioned it, with your partner Marta, like just having a support system. And I feel like I've over the last like 18 months particularly had an amazing support system, therapists and non-therapists, just tribe members who have contributed to me not getting to that point of, I have moments of overwhelming or anxiety. I feel like that comes from just like frustrations with the current structure of so many things I have to engage with, like just the dissonance and barbarism within the art industry and art world is something that like is a tension for me. And so having people that I can talk to about that and my feelings around that, like finding those people that push you in the positive way, that give you joy and life and light, that can keep you going. Because I think as artists, we're constantly pouring from our wells. and you can't pour from your well if your well ain't well, you know? So it's like how, how can you have a tribe of people that are, giving you that joy and that light that you need to keep your well.
Yeah, and I think also like surrounding yourself with people who truly believe in what you're trying to do or what you are doing. I think oftentimes you can work with people who have their own ideas or intentions, and I mean, everybody's entitled to that. But I think as an artist, it is important to surround yourself with people who believe in you, who believe in your ideas.
Yeah. Sure.
Should we move into questions and shit?
Let's do it. Yeah, Lynn, if you wouldn't mind bringing me back up. So we have a little bit of time to take some questions if you guys want to drop some into the chat here before we close out. And I just want to say it's been such a beautiful conversation too that has been had in the chat. A lot of things have resonated with folks. I want to share a couple of them that stood out to me. Dawn said earlier, thank you both so much for this conversation. I'm loving all the focus today on history. I want to share that I learned recently at a Grow That City Park class that before the statue and before the plantation, the entrance to City Park was an indigenous village, and that there were several Homa and Chapatulas and later Maroon settlements within what is now City Park. So many cycles and layers, which is this thing we keep coming back to, or who described it? Did Alexa, or several of you, I guess, have described it as a croissant or a donut or something like that. I wanted to, so I'll give you all a second to, if you have any questions, put them into the chat. This whole idea to me is so striking, just being able to contextualize pop culture iconography while also creating it. Everything is sort of folded into itself. It speaks to, you know, a lot of what we've been talking about today, about how legacy exists in all these tenses at once, sort of. And so I wanted to just start by presenting the same question to you that I presented to some of our speakers earlier, is, you know, and you've spoken to it in a big way in this conversation, but more directly, you know, what are the legacies that you'd like to be a part of creating, the Southern legacies that you'd like to be a part of creating or like see in the future? And that can be on any level, you know, personal, on a global, or, you know, pop culture, whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Nick, or you want me to take it?
You got it. Yeah.
So let me try to restate the question just to make sure that I have it right. What kind of legacy do I want to see? Or sorry, could you restate it?
Yeah. What sorts of legacies do you see yourself wanting to be a part of creating through your art? Since, you know, like that's the lens of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is how much of our legacy and the ideas of our legacies are relegated to what we can read about in books that were written by people who had the power to write those books and kind of dictate what the story was. And one thing I've been thinking about is like, how do we hold on to kind of the true history of a place, and also the emotional history of a place, which I think defines a lot of the identity of a place, and how that place kind of grows and kind of what's the word, morphs or throughout time. And I feel like one thing that I would want to see in the world, and maybe something that I would want to create, is an archive for like vernacular cinema, in a place where any and all the forms of media that people are making can be housed in, you know, an archive, like the Library of Congress, but like the Library of you know, of the South, or the Library of like New Orleans or something like that, where we can kind of really, just hold and protect and keep safe people's experiences. And I think like any artist who's here, or storyteller, or griot, or filmmaker who's making work is expressing some part of what's happening in their, in their surroundings, around them, or what's going on with their family, which is probably an effect of something that's happening within the world around them. So yeah, I would love to see and be a part of an archive of Southern cinematic vernacular filmmaking.
That's incredible. Funders and people who are friends with funders, please receive that. We want an archive.
Yeah, coming soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I say mine starts with, it's got to start with Haiti for me. I want to be a part of New Orleans fully acknowledging Haiti's deep influence on this place. I think just going back to even the Confederate monument conversation, it's like, we had those monuments exist in the city, for over 100 years, and we have nothing, and have to this day had nothing even close to that scale acknowledging, the impact of places like Haiti on our culture. And so I think a lot of my work does that, and works to bring it up to its deserved level of prominence, and also shedding light on the ways that which that same influence can be seen across the African diaspora, in places like Cuba and Brazil and Colombia. I can geek out because I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to the Haiti history, but in terms of just post-revolution Haitian history, if anybody would like to talk more about it, it's just that the impact is truly endless, whether we're talking about from a cultural perspective, whether we're talking about from an economical perspective. And so I think that's definitely part of the legacy that I'm trying to be a part of. And also, I think in some relationship to that, just recognizing the brilliance that we have always had and existed with, and not having to rely on white colonial capitalist-based institutions to show us that. I feel like within visual art, especially, it's like, oh, I'm not popping until I have a show here, or I'm not popping until I'm in this collection, or it's like, nah, we're popping, period. And but in that, creating a space or a legacy in which there are also more of us collecting our work and and pouring into our brilliance. I think, artists like Kehinde Wiley, large contemporary Black contemporary artists like that, so much of their work still is bought by, lesser melanated people, which to me is speaking to a larger issue. Obviously, it's speaking to a lack of education in terms of, what this contemporary art is. It's speaking to lack of financial fluidity, but I think, there are creative ways to combat a lot of that, and I want to be a part of that. It's I'm tired of just our expressions continuing to be, used in these very colonial based rubrics and fabrics, and so that's a little bit what I'm about too.
Yeah, that makes me so hopeful what both of you just shared. Thank you. I also see that Jason asked here, can you name one of your proudest moments as artists, both respectively?
I don't know, I think there are so many. Anytime, some of my proudest moments are if I'm making work with someone. For instance, last night we showed a clip from a work in progress feature that I'm working on called Blood Thicker. Blood Thicker, just to give a brief kind of synopsis of it, is about 3 young men, rappers, best friends, Black kids from New Orleans whose fathers were famous rappers, Juvenile, BG, and Soulja Slim. And the story is a story about legacy, and it's about how they're kind of moving through the world, underneath the umbrella of these kind of different legacies of continued success, incarceration, death. And oftentimes the proudest moments I have through the process of making work is when I show it back to the people that I'm making it with. and they are impacted by their own stories in a way, that maybe tells them something different about themselves or that they hadn't been thinking about. And even just the fact that they agree with my interpretation of their life, or they agree with, you know, the way that I'm exploring their personal stories. That really makes me happy, and that really like moves me, because I feel like if I'm making work with people in a community, oftentimes making work with people in communities that aren't like specifically my own, if they don't like the work, then I'm failing as a filmmaker, I'm failing as an artist. So if they do like the work, then I feel like that those are the moments that I kind of hold on to, and then I want to try to, yeah, to continue to do that, to continue to make work in a way that, yeah, that affects the people that it's made with.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think mine's related to just families. Like I think one of the proudest moments that comes to mind first is when my uncle came to a show that I curated. It was 2017, and this is the first like kind of major group show that I put together. And he just came to it, and he like walked around for a while, and then he came up to me and he's like, "Nic, you're an artist." And it was just kind of like this, like, you could tell like this eureka moment for him, because he's an amazing artist. His name's Jean Pierre. He's like, I mean, if you Google like Haitian history, often like his paintings are the works that come up, you know, and it's like, to me, you know, being as a kid, just being in his studio, you know, at my aunt's in his house, and I just really took it for granted. Like I was just like, oh, that's Tonto Ulrich, you know, he just paints and stuff, you know, and like then like grow up and I'm like, oh wow, like Tonto Ulrich's like really popping. And but like, yeah, I think when you you know, I'm sure Zach, you've had some experience of like when you really kind of lean into just your creativity and your art, there's kind of like, at least from family, like this kind of like misunderstanding and questioning and like, what are you doing? And like, how are you making money? I don't really understand any of this. And so I think like, yeah, for me, the proudest moments have come when like there's this acknowledgement and understanding from them. Like they're coming to my shows, or they're coming to whatever I'm doing, and like they're, you know, just as geeked as I am to like just, you know, be in this space. And yeah, because I think, yeah, that's where it starts for me, of where this is all coming from. Like I remember even when my parents were like, you know, there was probably about a year to 2 years of like tension around like what I was doing and understanding what I was doing. And like I remember in that period, I was like, yo, like, do y'all not realize I'm literally the combination of the two of you? Like, dad's an entrepreneur, you're a social worker, mom. Like, all like this is social art practice. I was like, it's literally the blend, you know. And so like I think, yeah, like once they understood, and once, you know, we got to that point, I think, yeah, like that's where like the proud moments start for me, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I identify with that too, and I feel like there's something about our parents' generation. Just to throw it out there, Nic and I are early 30s ish. So,
Yeah, 31.
Yes, not gonna drop my age, but parents are like probably like in the boomer generation or something like that. But anyway, I think that there was a push, you know, with our parents to be successful and to define success by kind of a monetary gain or like an upward mobility. And I see that throughout my parents' legacies, but also throughout my grandparents' legacies. And yeah, and I think at a certain point, like what that kind of, how that instills itself or ingrains itself within people is that like being an artist is disallowed to them. Like they grow up in places where like it's not possible to be an artist, or it doesn't make sense rather to define yourself as an artist. And I think about my dad in that way sometimes. Like he's an artist, my dad's a writer, he's a poet, he's a songwriter, he's a singer, but I've never heard of him like identify himself as like an artist. You know, he's a musical artist, he's a musician, you know, these are things that like were a little bit more comprehensible in like kind of a capitalist space, or in like a even just like a money making space. Like they made sense, especially being in New Orleans, so it was an art form that made sense to be here. But yeah, I definitely identify with what you're saying, and like leaning into what my sentiments are as an artist. Like sometimes I feel like I do have to do a little bit of extra work and like breaking it down to my family and stuff like that. Like, yeah, this is, you know, I made a 12-minute film and 6 minutes of it is just looking at water. But once you kind of understand and see the impact of it, or feel the impact of it rather, you know, and I think that's what your uncle was kind of experiencing, you know, in that moment. He's like, I feel this from you. I understand now that you are in fact an artist. I feel like, yeah, I'm getting goosebumps because I feel those moments too, when my family has been able to recognize like what my work is and what it's about.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's just, oh, I was just gonna add quick. I just think it's also like part of our role, even as their children. Like it's like we are naturally, you know, if we're going in a certain direction, like we should be more free in our abilities and expressions than they got to be. And I think like them finding pride, confidence, and comfort in that, because it's like, yeah, I mean, like I remember when I locked my hair, it was a thing with my mom, you know, and when I put color in my hair, it was a thing with my mom. When I, you know, it's like, you know, it's just like, you know, but I think as they go along, and also us acknowledging like that they're still evolving too, you know, and as we now continue to evolve as individuals, like them also finding comfort and confidence in that, like, yo, we get to like we're able to now in ways that you weren't able to, and that's beautiful. That's progress, is evolution. That's healing, you know. It's, yeah.
That's healing. I got goosebumps from all of that. I'm really just thinking of that aha moment of you're an artist, and it's not, you know, I've definitely felt the need myself to sort of explain like why a thing is significant, or, you know, what it's achieving, what it's trying to achieve, but nothing really compares to that moment where the person just feels what you're doing. And that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. So thank you both for sharing that with us, and for such an incredible conversation that I already can't wait to revisit as soon as I can. Before we close out for the day, can I just ask you both to, I mean, first, any closing words from either of you, and where can folks find your work and catch up with, you know, what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, closing words are, it's been really generative and beautiful to be in this space. And I think as an artist, like, so, all right, I would say this, like, I feel like when I am like given opportunities to speak a little bit more publicly, and like take myself outside of my edit space, or like outside from the, you know, from behind my camera, I'm often like working things out that I'm personally going through at the same time. And I don't know if you do that too, Shandik, but I'm always like going through some personal stuff, and I like to just kind of talk about it in public if given the space to do it. And I feel like I've been working through a lot of what it means to be an artist that's very difficult, which is like sometimes dealing with a lot of rejection, or dealing with processes that take a really long time, or feeling not quite happy with the work that you're making. But I think that like what's been really great about being at South Summit this year is to understand in different ways how the work that I'm making is impacting people, and actually to kind of be carried back to what I think is kind of what I'm always looking for, my ambitions in art making, and kind of to have support and kind of an acknowledgement of the simplistic beauty in a lot of the work that I'm wanting to make, or am making, or that I'm striving for. And yeah, just to have that work validated. So I appreciate, and I just like feel really gracious to be here talking to everyone and talking to you, Zandashay and Nick, and to have people here listening to this conversation, which is probably, you know, us processing, but even that feels like necessary in the process of being an artist. So thank you, and I'm excited to continue to be at South Summit and to hear more stuff and hear more people and experience more art.
Yeah, I think I would just share just closing thoughts. Like I was on a panel a couple weeks ago, and it was in relationship to the Basquiat exhibition that's in New York right now. It's the first one produced by his family, and over 200 never before seen works. And it was just this really amazing monumental exhibition. And I made sure in the panel to emphasize like how just to acknowledge the mental struggles that Basquiat was clearly going through, because there was this point in the show where he has this this note that he had written in his notebook, and he said, "I'd rather get out of jail than get $1 million." And it's just, to me, speaking to, and there's all these different interpretations of his work where curators or art historians don't even acknowledge the mental issues and struggles that he was having. And so I think as artists, again, going back to the idea of if your well isn't well, like it's like, you know, destigmatizing, I think, you know, therapeutic practices, whatever they may be, whether it's just having a great group of friends, whether it's an amazing acupuncturist, which I can recommend if anybody needs, whether it's a therapist, you know, it's like, yeah, it's, I think just kind of leaning into all of these therapeutic practices that keep us whole and keep us well and allow us to heal. Because I think that at its root, like that's what art is, you know, that's what it should be. You know, we've gotten very much away from that because of capitalism and colonialism, but you know, at the root, you know, it's like that's what art's about. And yeah, I think just acknowledging those things and supporting people in those therapeutic healing journeys is something I want to leave with. And yeah, if anybody's interested to talk more or learn more about my work, yeah, Instagram is the best way, I think, to keep up with me. I have this studio space right now. I'm in residence, like I said, with 5 other artists at Canal Place. It's a residency program put on by the Arts Council. So I'm here on Sundays for sure, but then also at other times. And so, yeah, if anybody ever wants to come to the studio and talk, yeah, always open for that. And thank y'all for the opportunity to share. Thanks, Zac and Zandashay, especially for the opportunity.
Thank you both so much. I hope everybody listening in has been just as nourished and inspired by this conversation as I have. Please help me just give them a virtual applause in the chat. Thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation.